tell you, I've been thinking a lot lately. There's these words going through my mind. And I'm just so sure I read it in a book somewhere sometime. So I'm going to tell it to you, and maybe you can tell me what book it is. Okay? That'd be great. I'd appreciate it so much. Let me see. How did it go? Oh, yes. Never yet have we experienced a forcible deflection of our national institutions by arms, by coup d'etat, or the seizure of property by one party or one class. We have never really been jolted into seeing laws as the mere instruments of power. But in this, as in no many other ways, the South has been an exception. Since the early years of the 20th century, events on the international scene have pushed us as a nation toward an increasing belief in legal eminence. More and more we have come to believe that a nation's laws are not mere instruments toward ends, but are themselves essential to the character of the society, inseparable from the society, an indwelling expression of a nation's purposes. This movement toward a wider belief in the oneness of a society's laws with its ends is illustrated by the contrast between our stated national objectives in World War I and in World War II. There is a striking contrast between the kind of objectives stated by President Woodrow Wilson in his 14 points annual address to Congress, January 8, 1918, and those stated by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in his Four Freedoms annual address to Congress. That's right. January 6, 1941, I believe it was, President Wilson itemized a number of objectives on the international scene. There was quite specific political and economic readjustments. For example, reduction of armaments, the impartial settlement of colonial claims, the evacuation of Russia, the restoration of Belgium, the freeing of invaded portions of France, the adjustments of the frontier of Italy, the autonomy of the peoples of Austria, Hungary, more and more. Subjectives required laws for their accomplishment, but the objectives were plainly separate from the laws. President Roosevelt's Four Freedom speech, on the other hand, described perils to the democratic way of life, which was assailed in every part of the world, and still is. His four essential human freedoms: freedom of speech and expression, freedom of every person to worship God in his own way, which is against atheists to add to that in these days and times. Freedom from want and freedom from fear. They were not political aims to be attained by legal tools. Rather, the aims themselves were as much legal as political. A nation's laws now were the touchstone. Laws were assumed to be not a mere instrument, but the primary expression of its way of life. From the American point of view, the conflict was between law-loving, law-fearing societies and others. In the 3 decades after our entry into World War I, leading Americans had ceased to believe that on international scene, the United States was concerned merely with the preservation of a political system. What had to be defended, it was said, again and again, was a way of life. The terrors of totalitarian democracies, of dictatorships, which actually could claim to express the will of the majority of their people, revealed that the mere fact that a government represented a current majority was no guarantee of decency or of respect for human rights. Only slowly did Americans abandon the political policy. They hung on to their belief, which many have not yet abandoned, that if a government outraged decency, then ex hypotheses, it could not express the will of the majority of its people. But it has lately dawned on more and more of us that the political democracy is only one element and not enough in itself to ensure decent institutions. Way of life means much more. It includes a society's laws and its attitude towards its laws. The traditional American distrust of legal instrumentalism has been expressed anew in a popular antipathy to isms, fear of any concept of society that would abstract and dogmatize national objectives, and then uses laws as mere tools toward those ends. We have seen that the kind of eminence which people find in the law, and which can satisfy their belief that the law is not arbitrary or purely instrumental, varies a great deal. It is far too narrow to identify this belief exclusively with natural law or with a belief in God. In the Soviet Union, and perhaps in other communist countries, it seems possible for people to have the satisfaction of a belief in legal eminence by seeing their laws as a manifestation of rules indwelling in history, as expounded in the Gospel according to Marx, Lenin, Stalin, and their followers. In Nazi Germany, people secured by belief in a racial destiny, an indwelling law of the folks, expounded in the Gospel according to Hitler, Rosenberg, and Goebbels. We are now too ready from our provincial point of view to view totalitarianism as a barefaced, unhallowed instrumentalism in which rulers use the law for their own ends. But this is not how such systems look to their supporters from the inside. These peoples have not given up the need to find some eminence, some transcendental indwelling validity in their laws. Rather, they find forms of eminence unfamiliar to us. We have yet to see a government that has ruled a society effectively without providing its people with some persuasive way of believing that their laws come from some higher, deeper, indwelling source.
To be continued.